Hello and welcome back to another episode. I hope you are doing well and are ready. Okay, you are ready to go on another pilot episode expedition as we break things down and decide if it's worth continuing on that full series journey because, like you, dear listener, I found that the hours in the day have stayed the same. Okay, but the list of things to watch have gotten longer and longer. So, do you know what? Actually, can we just have a moment's silence? A moment's silence for those stress-free days of 5 channels, no +1 channels, no record buttons, and having to wait 6 months to get state-made content. So just a moment, please. Thank you very much. Okay, so for the next 20-ish minutes, I'll be running you through the pilot episode of BBC One's Boat Story. Right, so here's how I like to divide these episodes. I like to look at the actors, writers and directors of the pilot episode, and then I let you know what made me press play before looking at the first 10 minutes of the pilot episode, and I get into why the first 10 minutes a little later. After that, I look at the main characters, both the good and the bad, before talking about where I suspect the series will go. And of course, whether I'll be following. I'll then wrap things up with a pilot score out of 5 because 10 is just too nuanced. 10 just allows for too many ifs, ands and buts. But 5, she's decisive. If you're ready, I'm Jen and this is what we're working with for the comedy thriller Boat Story. Firstly, to whet your appetite, here is the pilot synopsis taken from the TV information box. 2 strangers find a life-changing haul on a washed-up boat, but fortune comes at a price. That sums things up pretty well, I'd say, with a dash of foreshadowing thrown in at no extra cost. As seems to be on par of late, there is no pilot title, and because I've ranted and raved about that so often, I'm actually going to give you a pass and just move on to looking at the episode length. And I think it's about 57 minutes, so let's just round her up to an hour, which is typical for BBC programmes because there is, of course, no adverts, so you just get the full whack of an hour. The untitled pilot episode of Boat Story is written and directed by Harry Williams and Jack Williams, who have had their fingers in the British TV landscape since about 2007. Having a look through their back catalogue, it looks like they initially started writing comedy before finding their speciality in dark thrillers with the popular BBC drama The Missing, which then spawned the spin-off series Baptiste. If you want a detective drama with a little bit of a twist, Baptiste is just something else. I mean, The Missing is also good, but Baptiste. Anyway, they have their own production company, which is aptly named Two Brothers Pictures, and through that they have produced, developed, execed, and or written and or directed the following series: Relic, Back to Life, Liar, Angela Black, Fleabag, and The Tourist. Let's move on to cast, and you'll see that most of them have worked with the Williamses on past projects before. Firstly, we have Daisy Haggard, who plays Janet. Haggard has starred in the popular Sky Max series Breeders, which I've never seen, but there are always countless adverts on Sky whenever a new series is out, so I feel like I've watched it. Haggard is familiar to me from her 2-episode stint on Doctor Who during Matt Smith's time in the TARDIS as the 11th Doctor. I know, okay, I know I'm obsessed, but I haven't mentioned the 11th Doctor in at least 3 episodes, okay? So give me a break. Finally, Haggard starred in Back to Life, which she created, wrote and execed. Go Daisy. Back to Life was also execed by the Williams brothers, so that's her connection to them. Next, on the selected cast list, we have Patterson Joseph, who plays Samuel. A bit of a first name, last name, last name, first name, first name, last name situation there. Joseph has a pretty long filmography. He starred in Noughts and Crosses, the undermarketed BBC series based on the popular Mallory Blackman books. He also had a role in Vigil, which is a pretty intense whodunit set on a submarine, and actually a teaser for series 2 played before Boat Story, so that was a nice little oh, look what's coming soon. Joseph has also starred in the usual British suspects, so that's Silent Witness, The Bill, Doctor Who, Death in Paradise and Hustle, but also randomly he starred in the movie The Beach, the one with Leonardo DiCaprio, and he's had a long-running role in the NBC series Timeless. Finally, Joseph's connection to the Williams too comes from starring in the BBC drama Relic, which is killer backwards. Penultimately on the list, because I did not want to leave him till last, is Txeki Cario. Hopefully I said that correctly. He plays the tailor. Now, Mr. Cario is a French actor who is known for playing Julien Baptiste in the BBC dramas The Missing and its spin-off Baptiste, which is, of course, his connection to old Harry and Jack the Lad. Now, Cario has a bloody long filmography, but most of it is in French, so apologies that I can't name any popular French films he's been in. One day, people, one day I'll get a Spanish actor or have to watch a Spanish pilot episode and I can prove to all of you that I'm cultured, okay? It's just everything is in French and I can't speak French. No hablo francés, okay? It looks like Cario has played Van Gogh in a French film, which is cool. I like Van Gogh. There was actually an episode of Doctor Who called Vincent and the Doctor, which I really enjoy. Okay, no more. On the English side, he has had a role in the James Bond film GoldenEye as well as Bad Boys. Don't you just love how eclectic actors can be? Finally, on the selected cast list is Jonas Armstrong, who plays Arthur. I've always been a big Jonas Armstrong fan since his day of playing Robin Hood in the BBC series of the same name, which ran from 2006 to 2009. It's pretty much the same reason I have a soft spot for Richard Armitage. But Armstrong has also starred in Prisoners' Wives, Line of Duty, Ripper Street, Troy, Fall of a City, The Bay and The Drowning. I couldn't find a connection between the Williamses and Armstrong, which is a shame because I really wanted to make it a quadfecta. Boat Story is airing on BBC One and has a series length of 6 episodes, which are airing twice a week on Sundays and Mondays. There's no dramatic reason this week for what drew me to watching Boat Story. I always just kind of keep an eye on what's new on Sunday nights at 9 p.m. on BBC One specifically, because it's kind of come to be that place to find great original British drama. So I just keep tabs. Also, I recognise Txeki Cario and I really like him as an actor from his time as Julien Baptiste on the series The Missing and Baptiste. So I thought, it's bound to be half decent. With that being said, let's get into the first 10 minutes of Boat Story. Now, why the first 10 minutes, you wonder, with a Mr. Darcy-esque quizzical brow? Because as a screenwriter and script reader, I was always taught that this is your chance and sometimes your only chance to capture your reader and then audience member, to convince them to keep reading and eventually to keep watching. So that's why I always analyse the first 10 minutes. So the first 10 minutes of Boat Story. Okay, try and stick with me as we look at the first 10 minutes. It's a bit of a interesting but bumpy ride. It starts with a narrator, and this omniscient voice of the narrator tells us that this is a story about a boat that has washed up on a beach and changed a lot of lives. The narrator introduces us to the main players in quick successive clips, and then we get a silent movie style intertitle, that black screen with an ornate white border. Within this are the words, some prologues use epilogues. The intertitle then cuts to a kid who sees something on the ground and runs away screaming. Our narrator helpfully interjects to tell us how some stories start, but how this story starts with a severed head, which we then see as the thing that the boy ran away from. We recognise this particular severed head as one of the characters we were briefly introduced to, Samuel. Then we begin, and the narrator introduces us to a woman, Janet, and a town, Applebury, which is described as the kind of place that people go to die. It is a Thursday, and it's the day that Janet's life will be forever changed. And he's right, because at the factory where Janet works, her hand gets crushed due to the negligence of the people around her. Then we pull out of the factory and Janet's smushed hand and go to a boat in the middle of a storm that gets pulled over by the boat police, who have nothing on Annika Strandhead. An officer then comes aboard, and you get the sense that neither he nor the fisherman driving the boat are good people. While the officer takes a look around, he quote-unquote discovers a ton of drugs. Then he and the fisherman, who is wielding a knife, fight. Well, it's less of a fight and more of a salty, slippery wrestle, but kind of just reminded me of a couple of walruses just battling it out. The police officer prevails as he violently knifes the fisherman, but his victory is short-lived when he slips and snaps his neck, and then he's dead. That's it. He's just, boom, they're both finished, dead, gone. Some jaunty French music starts up and plays us out of that scene, and that is the first 8 minutes. If you're curious about what happens after that, especially because I'm always harping on about the first 10 minutes, we then go back to Janet, and it's clearly been a bit of time since the accident, as the place where her fingers should be has been healed over and she is able to wear a prosthetic hand. Not a very interesting 2 minutes, but that then takes us to the 10-minute mark. The best way I can think to phrase not only the opening 10 minutes, but the series as a whole is to think of it like a bedtime story for adults written by Mr. Series of Unfortunate Events, Lemony Snicket. To give you some wider context beyond the first 10 minutes so that the rest of this episode kind of makes sense to you, we have two characters, Janet and Samuel, who are strangers they've never met, but they meet when they find a boat full of drugs that they then decide to steal too. And that's it in a nutshell. So with that being said, let's look at both of these characters. And we are first formally introduced to Janet. She's got blue in her hair and looks way too interesting for the small life she leads. She looks like the kind of person that things happen to, you know, the kind of person that has a story to tell whether or not you want to hear it. Weirdly enough though, she's not like that at all. She's a woman who is down on her luck and doesn't seem to have any friends either. The Janet we meet needs a win. In regards to how I can picture Janet dealing with the conflict coming her way, you know, from the stolen drugs, I think she doesn't have anything to lose. She's lost her hand, her son, and her job, not necessarily in that order, and she is still fighting. The problem with fighters, though, is that they want to live, and the danger she and Samuel have gotten themselves into could very easily see Janet dead. When it boils down to it, I think Janet is likely to give it all up and throw Samuel under the bus to get out of this pickle that they've put themselves in. Next, of course, we have Samuel. Samuel. We don't really know much about old Sammy Sam other than what he's told us. He's a lawyer who moved to Applebury from London with his wife and daughter, which has something to do with how he gambled away their life savings. We don't know if the move and the being broke are mutually exclusive, which I question because he also says that his family have no idea that he's gambled away their entire life savings. We also don't know if he is still currently working as a lawyer. Oh, and he has a cat, or the family have a cat called Major Tom, and that's all we know about Samuel. To be honest, the only discernible thing I can gather from his personality is that he reeks of desperation. And as we know, desperate people can be unpredictable, and I think when it comes to conflict, Samuel is ready to lie, cheat, and maybe even kill to get himself out of a bind. Also, I want to quickly address the arguably racial stereotype that takes place in the pilot episode. When Samuel and Janet find the bodies on the boat of the fisherman and the police officer, and then the drugs, Janet is shocked, dismayed, and emotional about the bodies, while Samuel is distant and automatically assesses the amount of drugs on board, and then not only knows that the street value runs in the tens of millions, but he also has a contact who would be interested in buying it. I'm sorry, but why? For why? Like, why? Why does he know all of these things? Is he a criminal lawyer whose job it is to know this very specific piece of information? Does his wife work with the drug squad? Is his brother a prolific drug lord? Or is Samuel just a black man? And hey, maybe there's a very good reason to why Samuel automatically sees a bunch of drugs and just knows how much it's worth and where to sell it. But in the pilot episode, that doesn't come up, and that is all I'm here to judge, okay? From the good guys to the bad, let's move on to chatting antagonists. And really there are two. One who I believe is the true antagonist and the other who is simply a businessman. The businessman is the true owner of the drugs that we found on board the boat, the tailor. It sounds better in French apparently, but we've long established on the pilot principle that French is not my forte. The tailor is incredibly ruthless. We watch as he orders what is essentially a massacre to get his drugs back, and we automatically, I don't want to say worry exactly, but we're apprehensive in advance of him crossing paths with the misshapen strangers who have stolen his drugs. Then, the second antagonist we have, who I believe is the actual antagonist, is Arthur. Arthur, who is a police officer, was partners with the officer who boarded the boat and shanked the fisherman to steal the drugs that lay in the house that Jack built. The drugs that were owned by the tailor. And the tailor knows that Arthur and his partner double-crossed him and he is coming for him. That's if he can find him first. Now, why do I think Arthur is the real antagonist? Because he's the flipping thief out here trying to do one over on a drug lord. In fact, bring Janet and Samuel down here too, because the tailor should really be the hero of the story. He's the only one minding his business, protecting his interests, okay? Everybody else is out here trying to borrow, beg, and steal things that don't belong to them. I mean, where's the moral in that? Where's the moral in leaving the drugs, just working for a drug lord and doing as you're told, just finding a boat full of drugs and just calling the police and minding your business? Minding your business should be the true moral of this story, and it's a lesson I think adults have lost. We're going to take a quick interlude to see what TV and film life is looking like beyond the pilot principle. There have been a few second series that have recently been released. The Gilded Age, which is showing on Sky Max here, but I believe is also a HBO programme. The Lazarus Project, which is showing on Sky Max in the UK. And Invincible Series 2, which is available on Amazon Prime Video. Or is it just Prime Video? I'm never quite sure. So The Gilded Age is a period drama set at the turn of the century, and it's looking at old money versus new money. The Lazarus Project is a time-bending genre-type drama, and Series 1 was one of my favourite programmes from last year, so I have always been ranting and raving about The Lazarus Project Series 2, and I'm very, very excited to finally start that at some point. And Invincible, I actually only watched the first series not that long ago, like I'm talking 2 weeks ago, so I'm waiting for all the episodes to be released before I start on Series 2. So it's quite an eclectic mix, but I mean, I watch a lot of stuff, as I'm sure everybody does, and it's nice to have things to pick from to go with whatever mood you're in. Also, Netflix has released the 65-episode first series of Batman the Animated Series, which I am looking forward to watching, or getting into, I should say, because I've watched the first couple of episodes. I've heard really solid things about the series, though I am trying to manage my expectations. And as it's only 22 minutes apiece, I'll probably slip it into my lunchtime viewings and just sort of see how it goes from there. Moving on to film, does anybody else feel like after a massive dry spell, every movie in the history of cinema has decided to be released in the same week? You know, I thought it was because we were gearing up towards award voting season, but I just realised that it's Thanksgiving time, so that's probably the real reason that all these movies are being released. I did manage to catch Dream Scenario this week, which stars Nicolas Cage and was written and directed by Christopher Borgli. It was a surprising twist on cancel culture, blame, and how making a dream a reality isn't always a good thing, I think. It's an A24 film, so who even knows for sure. Ridley Scott's Napoleon is also showing in cinemas, as is Emerald Fennell's Saltburn and the new Disney movie Wish, so lots to see. If you want to keep up to date with what I'm watching in general, not just pilot episodes, and maybe even with what I'm reading, then go ahead and make sure to follow at Pilot Principle on Instagram, Threads, and Twitter/X. I still don't know if the war has been won yet on the naming, so I'm staying neutral for the time being. Okay, back to your regularly scheduled listening. This is the time where I talk about what my favourite part of the pilot episode was. Favourite part. I'm just kidding. I think I would say that meeting the tailor was my favourite part of the pilot episode of Boat Story. Now, we are introduced to this French man who is measuring up a client. And I'll tell you right now, for free, I have never been so enamoured with the French language, because that, smooth. Now, when the client leaves, the tailor heads to the back of his shop where a man waits in cuffs, and after some back and forth, he cuts off a piece of said man in cuffs. It was a very clear-cut, pun intended, and memorable way to frame the tailor who is all business in the front and violent in the back. Now, what I didn't like about the pilot episode of Boat Story, there were a lot of things, elements, if you will, throughout the pilot episode. The Once Upon a Time-esque narrator, the intertitles come scene dividers, the flash forwards and the flash backwards. We have three big dumb goons who are talking about ordering Chinese after they go and basically massacre a bunch of people. We have a French tailor. We have Major Tom the Cat, or Major Tomcat. Anyway, I think all that stuff was wheat and chaff, just unnecessary, distracting, and poorly disguising a wider issue with plot, character, pace, and tone. There. I've said it now. I'm not normally this brutal, but it is what it is, isn't it? Moving on to what we have at the end of the episode. The end of episode hook lets us know that the tailor is making his way to London to track down Arthur, who he suspects stole his drug, and to make him pay for it. Of course, he'll eventually find out that it wasn't Arthur and it was Janet and Samuel. So, oh, there is another little teaser, but I won't spoil it because it's a nice little surprise for anyone who is thinking about watching the pilot episode. Now, regarding the serial arc, everything involves these drugs. So I'm sure they'll show what Janet and Samuel's plan is because they never got that far in the pilot episode. Also, who are they going to involve in order to help them move the merch? So I'm sure that will come through over the course of 6 episodes. Then there is, of course, the tailor who has to eventually make his way to Applebury to track down Arthur and his drugs and whoever may or may not have said drugs at the time. I'm sure there'll be all manner of accidental and incidental interconnecting of characters who have no clue what the audience knows about what they all know. Now there's only one question left to ask. Will I be continuing with Boat Story? Pause for dramatic effect? No. And here is why. So firstly, for me, there's no chemistry whatsoever between Janet and Samuel. They really feel like two strangers, which of course I know that they are, but they don't even feel connected by this big thing that they've done despite spending all day together. And to be honest, they're just pretty awkward to watch as a duo. Secondly, perhaps I've missed the big picture with Boat Story, but I didn't find or understand the tone. There were moments of supposed humour, scenes of graphic violence, and scenes of silliness. I'll be the first to admit that I'm not partial to a British comedy, but I still just didn't get it. I didn't get what they were going for. And so because of that, it just kind of felt uncomfortable to watch, which leads me on to my final reason for not continuing with the series. Boat Story, from the pilot at least, felt like a genre-bending social experiment that didn't quite wash ashore. But that's just me. Now, if you like a British comedy that's a bit more risque, then press play. If you prefer programs that are more story-driven rather than character, then this also could be for you. Finally, if you're looking to shake up your Sunday nights, then I would say press play and come back to me and tell me your thoughts, because I'm curious to know what other people think about this. Last but not least is to give the unnamed pilot episode of Boat Story a pilot score. And for me, it is a 2 out of 5. I'll probably end up rehashing a few points I've already made here. But firstly, the pilot established Janet's character really well, but Samuel got left with the breadcrumbs. We basically know nothing about our co-lead by the end of the episode. I did briefly think that perhaps he's not who he says he is, but I'm chalking it up to lazy character building. Secondly, another note on poor establishment is Applebury, where this all takes place. We just don't know it very well. All we know is that it's a small town with a factory and a police station, but considering it seems to have a drug problem, a little more of a sense of place would have worked well, I feel. Finally, the undefinable tone is why I couldn't give this a higher score. I genuinely cannot think how to describe it in under 5 words, because calling it a comedy thriller barely scratches the surface. Now that we've hashed out the fundamental principles, will you be giving the pilot episode a watch? Or have you already watched the first few episodes of Boat Story? Let me know over on Instagram, Threads, and Twitter/X @PilotPrinciple, where you can also let me know what you'd like me to perhaps do an episode on next. Make sure to follow and rate this podcast on your audio streamer of choice. Have a good week, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Aww.